I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're exploring the availability for New Yorkers to purchase a non-lethal self-defense tool like pepper spray, which is the subject of legislation from Assemblymember Chris Eachus, a Hudson Valley Democrat, who joins us in the studio. Thanks for making the time, Assemblymember.
Good afternoon. Nice to meet you.
Nice to have you here. So right now, a self-defense spray in New York is legal to purchase, but you're looking to make them a little more accessible. What is it about the status quo that you find too restrictive right now?
Well, if I could give you the story about how this started,
Sure.
It actually started with a former student of mine. Came into my district office and said, I'd like to start a women's self-defense class and course, and the end of it would be giving the folks that took the course a kit to protect themselves with. And that's all it was. And I said, what a great idea. You know, what things can I work on? I had my staff take a look at it, and one of the things was pepper spray. But then we quickly found out, to answer your question, that pepper spray and self-defense sprays here in New York, you can't ship them through the mail or postal or Amazon and so on like that. You can only buy them in certain licensed pharmacies and licensed gun shops. Just a whole bunch of restrictions, which made it essentially very difficult for anybody who wants this for protection, non-lethal protection, to actually obtain it.
Well, can you talk about what your bill would do then to make this more accessible?
Absolutely. For accessibility, it allows you to ship them through the mail. In other words, you can purchase them offline and so on like that. It's going to allow stores. Perhaps, I'm not dictating this, but perhaps Walmart or Target would like to pick this up and make it available for folks. We know Walmart does guns, rifles, and so on like that, so maybe this is something they'd be interested in. So in other words, that it's more available to the average public.
And your bill includes language about, say, for the purpose of delivering a self-defense spray to any person, the seller shall require a proof of age. So does that mean there is a minimum age that you have to be to purchase
Yes.
pepper spray?
Yeah, there's a minimum age. It's 18 right now. We are not changing that. We still believe that only 18-year-olds and older, can handle this sort of thing. But it does take away the fact that when you do buy pepper spray currently, you also have to fill out a form. So you have to be someplace to fill out that form and so on like that. That would not be required any longer.
How come you feel like that's a reasonable restriction to strike down?
Again, it's a non-lethal method of safety, of protection. We should, really be encouraging people to use non-lethal methods if they're feeling scared, unsafe, in places where they feel that they want something a little more secure. To have people only go to certain pharmacies or into a gun shop, and some folks are going to be turned off about having to go into a gun shop
Sure.
alone, but to have them, have to fill out a form when they're all done, hey, what, is the government watching me? That whole deal about eyes in the sky sort of thing, and it's no, we want you to have this particular product and be able to use it.
Any concerns about if this does become more widespread, if your bill does become law and it becomes easier to obtain pepper spray, that people will be using it more readily and maybe not just defensively, maybe in an offensive capacity?
Right. Absolutely a concern that we had in writing this bill. It's called use of force. It does not change any of the rules on use of force. So if somebody uses this in anything other than a defensive mode, it's going to come with charges.
And you mentioned how at the start this was something that was born out of people who were doing a class and were looking to put together a kit. So clearly we're interested in being prepared and thoughtful about their self-defense.
Right.
If people, though, are not taking that same careful approach, are you worried about this being deployed in maybe a first resort or a knee-jerk reaction in maybe self-defense ways, but maybe in ways that could have been avoided?
Well, you're asking a kind of an out there question in the sense that, are there people who are going to possibly misuse this? Of course there will be. We're dealing with human nature, unfortunately. But I don't think that is a reason to restrict it as much as we have here in New York State. Example, there are only 4 states that don't allow it to be shipped or you can't buy it online. It's New York, Massachusetts, Alaska, and Hawaii. The rest of the United States, you can purchase these things widely, easily, if you want them. Do we hear a lot about people using pepper spray or self-defense sprays as an aggressive weapon?
Right.
No, we don't.
I don't think anyone's, held up a bank using pepper spray.
Yeah.
In terms of the makeup of the pepper spray, your bill also defines the threshold for the amount of capsaicinoid, if I had
Very
that
good.
pretty right. This is the
Yeah.
active ingredient. How come you felt it was important to define that in law?
Because, for instance, there's something out there called bear spray. Okay, this is a very potent spray and so on like that. That needs to continue to be restricted because that can almost be to a point where it could be fatal if used wrong. We wanted to keep it at a 1.33% of capsaicinoids because we know that no matter how much you spray somebody with that, it's not going to kill them. It'll make them defensive, but it won't hurt them at all.
So you're looking to put in or maintain that threshold for what the makeup of pepper spray looks like. At the same time, you're looking to make pepper spray more accessible, bring in potential other retailers. Are you worried that you're going to be opening the market more broadly and thus it's going to become harder to regulate and police, and you might have some products come on the market that are going to be above that threshold and it becomes just harder to police what's actually in that?
That's a great question. Do I worry about it? Not so much, because I have faith in our justice system. I have faith in all of our businesses really out there. There are corrupt ones, there's no question about it. But, I think that they will understand, look, we've taken this step to make it more available, to make it a little more potent than what it currently is now. Let's get it out to the public, to the general public.
Well, speaking of the general public, this was an issue that was polled recently by the Siena Research Institute, and we can talk about those numbers in a second. But first, let me reintroduce you. For listeners just joining us, I'm David Lombardo, and this is WCNY's The Capitol Press Room, and we're speaking with Assemblymember Chris Eachus, a Hudson Valley Democrat. So the Siena poll asked essentially this question, quote, currently New York law only allows certain pharmacies and gun stores to sell pepper spray or similar self-defense sprays. Do you support or oppose removing that restriction, making it easier for New Yorkers to buy pepper spray? And a majority of New Yorkers are supportive, 59% to 53% of Democrats supportive, 62% of Republicans, and about 2/3 of those coveted independent voters. I imagine you're pretty happy to see that recent polling.
I'll tell you what really made me happy is when you take a look with that polling between male and female.
Sure.
And it's almost equal
Yep.
on the desire. How about between minorities and others? The minorities want it too. It was very favorable with all groups across the board, which was absolutely stunning to me, making me happy, obviously.
And there's that 13% that identified as in the middle, so maybe they're apathetic or maybe they could be swayed. But in terms of people whose votes really matter, what about your Assembly Democratic colleagues? What's your sense of their support for something like this? Since you've been pushing it, do you feel like it's a uphill battle? Are you having to do some sort of education about it? What's the effort been like?
Now, so far, we really didn't open it up, as you probably are aware, besides this poll that was from the March 23rd to 26th, just this past Monday. There was an article in the New York Post, quoting me about this whole situation and all. So it's really taken on a life of its own. And we have quite a number of co-sponsors, it's bipartisan, both Democratic and Republican. I think those that aren't on the bill really weren't aware of the bill and that it was out there. Today, we actually did put out a flyer saying, here's the bill, this is what they're talking about in the Siena poll, here's what they're talking about, in the Post, New York Post. This is what it is, and here's the bill.
And have people been rushing in with their gold slips to come co-sponsor the bill now?
No, since we did it, everybody is rushing home, I'm afraid.
Gosh, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, short little break here.
Yeah.
But we've seen that the Assembly can be a little skittish when it has to do with anything with weapons, even in the non-lethal form. So, are there people that you feel like you're going to have to sway in either leadership or some of the committee chairs that you're going to have to navigate?
I don't believe in leadership or committee chairs, but there are some of my colleagues which will need an explanation, a more thorough explanation, because they may not even read the bill. and so I would need to explain it to them as we are talking about it today. I think the folks that listen to your cast are getting an excellent education on what this bill is about.
That's what we strive for here.
Yeah.
Well, with the time we have left, I want to turn to another issue, a recurring issue, something that the school boards officials of New York recently highlighted for policymakers here in New York, and that's the mandate to first transition to electric vehicles for school buses, process that's going to have to start by 2027 and then be completely sort of implemented by 2035. What's your sense of that process and how manageable it is, and whether we need to be thinking about changing those mandates?
Well, if I could first give my experience
Please.
in that.
Yes.
My experience,
Voir dire witness.
My experience with electric vehicles, and by the way, also solar vehicles, I've been building these for approximately 30 years now. And I was back in the 90s when I was creating these things. Mm-hmm. And these are actual vehicles. We're not talking about models. We're talking about actual vehicles. I've driven them all across this country, from Texas to Florida, out to Los Angeles and so on like that, in races and so on. And I've been very lucky. I had a very successful high school team that did this. They actually built them from the ground up and all. As a matter of fact, I was dealing, I think that you'll find this a little funny, I was dealing with lithium-ion batteries in the late 90s, and we were actually drilling into those batteries and putting new cathodes in them to get a change in power density out of those batteries and all. Okay. You think about today, about drilling into lithium-ion batteries, you're out of your mind.
Sure.
So, but thank God we did it safely. There were never any accidents or injuries or anything like that for us. But anyway, I feel that if I was around as they brought these restrictions in, mm-hmm. I could have used my knowledge to convince my folks about what is possible and what's not possible. I can tell you right now, there are only 23 companies across the world that build these electric buses. There's a backlog here in the United States alone of 4,400 orders for these buses. And now we are mandating it. And of course, what's the first thing that happens when you mandate something? The price goes up. And so the price is out of hand for these vehicles. The school districts can't afford it. We also have a couple of, bless their hearts, we've had a couple of districts up in the North Country who have tried it. And actually some of the buses have not been successful in the cold weather. So we know that this is something that we need to push back. And I've told the school boards, I've told the teachers' unions, I've told everybody that it's not a popular idea, but they need to push this idea. Reason it's not popular is if you're a true environmentalist, you're saying, I want that now. And I get that. I want it now too, but it's not possible. It's not reality that we're dealing with. And that's why I created this bill, to push those dates back. Not get rid of them, but push them back.
You mentioned the idea of the mandate potentially driving up costs. There was an argument made that if you're creating a market, if you're creating this demand from 700 school districts to purchase these zero-emission buses, that is ultimately going to drive the price down. And clearly we haven't seen that since the implementation of the mandate. But what do you think of that general argument that if you have more people who are into that market, there's going to be an eventual drop in cost?
I believe there will be an eventual drop in cost, no question about it. But right in the beginning, these bus companies are going to take advantage of everything that they can. And that is, oh, you have to buy these buses from me? Guess what you're going to be paying?
Well, we've been speaking with Assemblymember Chris Eachus. He is an Orange County Democrat who hopefully will tell us about his electric vehicle races in the future. Assemblymember,
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for making the time.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to today's edition of the Capitol Press Room. For an insider take on what's happening in state government, check out our Dispatches from Planet Albany show, available wherever you get podcasts or at capitolpressroom.org.
Join us again for Capitol Press Room, a production of WCNY Connected, Syracuse.